E3 2017 wasn't very good. I don't think that's a particularly bold statement. It's like saying urine is supposed to be red. It just goes without saying. However, the abject shock to this revelation is what I find especially baffling. You can probably attribute this to unwarranted hype, something you should avoid like a guy with Parkinson's avoids a drawing contest. But even taking into account healthy optimism, provided you have a field of view wider than a hay straw, the sign should have been obvious from the start. When looking at the major companies holding conferences and taking into account recent releases and the in-house studios we're aware of, I was bracing myself for very few major game announcements. But fuck me, did they go above and beyond in failing to even meet my Earthcore low expectations. The root of the disappointment stemming from E3 this year is abundantly obvious to pretty much everybody who paid attention, and the base standard we hold companies to when they attend E3 separated the winners from the losers. Nintendo won E3, and I can say this confidently because they met the unspoken criteria for a good E3 presentation, something that a lot of the other companies didn't do. There were several new game announcements, the most earth-shattering of them being Metroid Prime 4 and to a lesser extent Metroid Samus Returns. I was so surprised and happy. I'm so glad that we're getting 2 new Metroid games, and this is clearly the common consensus among the gaming community. Frankly, that alone would have been enough for me, but they also announced a new Yoshi and Kirby game, and the trailers for the existing games we knew about were great. Mario Odyssey looks fantastic. On top of this, Nintendo released tons of gameplay for a lot of these titles following their E3 spotlight being played on the stage in real time, something that cannot be said for Microsoft and Sony. Speaking of these two, let's talk about what they did wrong. We're going to be here for a while, might want to pull up a lawn chair for this one. To make myself clear from the outset, I don't think Microsoft or Sony did a bad job. I mean, both of them did badly in different ways, but I say this because some of what they showed looked good. Metro Exodus, The Last Night, Ori, Crackdown 3, Days Gone, Detroit Become Human, Spider-Man, these all looked really cool. But some good games in a mixed conference does not a good conference make. And what Microsoft and Sony fundamentally fucked up at was showing off new games. Microsoft, and to a greater extent Sony, barely announced any major first-party titles, and by first-party I don't mean just exclusive, but in-house games developed by Sony or Microsoft-owned studios. The only game I can think of is Forza 7, but we all knew that was going to be announced anyway. I mean, Forza is the Call of Duty of sports games, and I wasn't exactly blowing my load when they announced a new fucking car at a video game conference. Of the games that were announced by Microsoft, all of them were either flat-out multi-platform third-party games or indie games which will be released on PC anyway. There were no exclusives on Microsoft's stage. Everything they showed at their conference will be available on my PC. Xbox One or not, if there aren't any exclusive games, I have no reason to buy an Xbox One. But at the very least, new games were announced at Microsoft's conference. I look forward to playing all of them on my PC, but at least they announced new games. Sony didn't even try in this regard. They didn't show anything we didn't already know about except for Monster Hunter, which is a multi-platform game, and a bunch of VR games like Final Fantasy Fishing. Never knew how much I needed that in my life. I'd like to think that EA were trying to warn us about what we should expect this year by announcing virtually nothing and spending most of their time on bollocks like EA Sports. Bethesda are currently batting 1 for 3 when it comes to their conferences. Wolfenstein 2 looks great, but I didn't care about anything else they showed, mainly because I don't care about Skyrim or ESO. Of the publisher conferences, Ubisoft undeniably did the best job. South Park: The Fractured But Whole remains one of my most anticipated games of the year, and on top of this, they had several new game announcements. I mean, Devolver Digital's conference was the best of the publishers in terms of sheer entertainment value, but when we're talking about the major ones, I think Ubisoft did the best. As you've probably deduced, 2 good conferences out of 6 isn't all that great. In fact, it's kind of bad, to be honest. I would say, if I was being perfectly frank, E3 2017 is probably the worst E3 that we've seen in years. Maybe even worse than E3 2014. Doesn't mean there weren't good games shown off. Every single conference had at least one game that I thought looked great, but the issue is that the majority of these games are ones we already knew about. People watch E3 to be surprised, and the only conference that really surprised me this year was Nintendo. But I mean, it's not like anybody could have known this before E3. It's not like I made a video beforehand where I predicted exactly why this E3 wouldn't be good and ended up being exactly right. I mean, when am I ever right about my predictions? Like with the Xbox One X and their enhanced games. I mean, Fringy's always wrong all the time. He's just hyperbolic and makes things up. Alright, I'll stop stroking my own penis now.